moving this whole realm forward of decentralization and blockchain and what's possible. So you being here tonight is part of that vision happening. And I want to thank everybody that's here tonight, taking your time. And the intention is to make this worth your time. So usually we go around, we do introductions, but we're not going to do that tonight because we have a speaker from Singapore joining us via Zoom. And Laurent, Dedenis is the CEO of Chainstack, and Chainstack is one of the sponsors at Hyperledger Global Forum. And Chainstack has done this report on the blockchain ecosystem, and Laurent's going to go over that report and share some items that they've researched, as well as they also one of the Chainstack team, Axe, will be joining us, I believe, from Moscow. So, Laurent, there's your introduction. Anything I missed? Anything you want to add to that? And take it from here.
Oh, thank you very much, Jay. Thank you very much for giving us an opportunity to present the result of our research to you and to the Desert blockchain community. I hope everyone can actually hear me fine.
Yep, we can hear you.
All right, very good. So as Jay mentioned, our team and myself are based in Singapore, and I want to make everyone feel comfortable. The coronavirus does not transfer through Zoom, so we are all safe, and we should all go through very nicely.
Laurent, we're all wearing our masks, so it's
okay. All right. So I wanted to give you a little bit of background on why we created this report. I'm not sure how many of you had the opportunity to go through the report and check some of the metrics that we report to. But I wanted to give you a little bit of context as to why we created this report and what's the background and what we intend to do with it, and taking feedbacks and hopefully comments from people reading the report. And we had a lot of it in the past 2 weeks since we released the report, improving it as we go. So the Enterprise Blockchain Protocol Evolution Index was came basically from multiple sets of questions and constant comments that we got from partners and from customers around the enterprise blockchain space, and especially the private permission blockchain space. I mean, we had a lot of requests either by email or during our meetings in the past 1 year to understand what is the best protocol, what are the trends, what is the protocol that people should use. And part of these are, of course, difficult answers and precise answer to give answer to, but precise questions to give answer to. But we saw that giving kind of a state of the union of what happened in the enterprise blockchain space in the past 5 years since it was created, because the first protocol was really created in 2015, could actually be a good indication of, number one, the traction and the evolution of the number of developers and activities of these developers, could actually give useful information for people building on top of blockchain when it comes to ecosystem size, the ability to leverage the network effect. So that's how the idea of the report came about, understanding trends and understanding the ecosystem. Now, the Evolution Index took 3 months to design and quite a few months to compile. It's actually a lot of data that you need to track. And today, Ake Konstantinov, who is in charge of all knowledge for Chainstack and who is the father in some way of the report, will actually walk us through some of the detail and explain how the methodology was built. But it's basically a 3 months effort in order to make that happen. Now, when building the report, what we really wanted to do is make sure that we would stay neutral. We did not want to judge or give any judgmental comments. We wanted to give fact and raw fact as they were, so that people reading the report like you could actually make up their own mind and opinion about what they think of the traction of a specific blockchain protocol, and of course, how they want to compare this protocol against each other. And that's probably the number one set of questions and comments that we got out of publishing the report was around the protocol that we selected. And I would admit that we had to make a choice and we had to make decisions when it comes to which blockchain protocol we were going to track as part of the first index. And we basically choose to focus on the ones that we thought had the largest traction and the largest visibility in the market. And that's a little bit subjective. So I take with a grain of salt people telling me, well, that's not necessarily a right way of looking at it. But it is also substantiated by reports from both Gardner, published in 2019, and IDC, published in late 2019, about the fragmentation of the market, the multiplicity of the blockchain protocol there is, but also the market share that some of these protocols have got. And the protocol we choose are basically the ones that have that are basically in the top 8 blockchain protocol in the Gardner report. So we settled down for Coda, for multi-chain, for Quorum, and for 3 of the Hyperledger family, for Besu, Fabric, and Sotus. And before I hand it over to Ake, I would say that we're looking at really 2 things here. First, it's not because you made it to the first index that you're going to make it forever in the future index. And this market is actually a moving market. In fact, at any point of time, there are about 8 to 10 new protocols we are evaluating and looking at for our own business, and that we are considering for inclusion in the blockchain, in the enterprise blockchain report at some point. Blockchain protocol like EOS or like Tezos, but also some others that you might be familiar with that we think are gaining traction in the enterprise space, and that would be interesting to track. So of course, that's my last slide as a way of introduction. We did draw some of the number out of the report so that we could market the report. So those are probably a little bit isolated numbers that we actually choose to select. You can actually drill down into each of these numbers and make up your own mind and opinion about whether this number compare well or fair compared to other protocol. But I wanted to highlight really 2 numbers to you guys. So the first number is the ecosystem of developer working on private permission blockchain that we track is actually very significant and growing. And I think that's a good sign for the entire community, especially considering that 2 of the protocols that we're tracking did not exist back in 2015 and have less than 4 years of history. So you do have this general trend about protocol acquiring and engaging with larger developer community in some different ways, and Ake is going to go through that. But we thought that this was interesting. I mean, the fact this is a growing community is an overall good news for the enterprise blockchain community, as of course these developers become more mature and proficient at building solution on top of this protocol. You'll see some of those applications being used and some of those protocol and companies using them, taking advantage of the network effect. All right, so let me pause here and let me welcome Ake, who's going to go through some of the detailed number of the report, and then we'll have some conclusion and hopefully question and answer from you guys at the end. Let's make this session interactive if we can. All right, Ake, to you.
Good. Hey everyone. First, I'm going to say a few words on the methodology and the well, all the data is publicly available, and for the numbers and for the data, we're using a third-party open source project called GH that's been tracking the GitHub repositories and projects since 2011, which gives us the opportunity to track all of the protocols, all of the blockchain protocols since they ever started on GitHub. And we are tracking the unique developer numbers, GitHub activity, and GitHub pushes for all of the protocols that we indexed relative to the GitHub accounts that did all of those events which comprise the GitHub activity. And for the first slide, we are going to compare the total activity and total pushes for all the protocols. And for total activity, the activity means any time GitHub account does anything, basically relative to the repository, it triggers an event on GitHub. And an event could be anything, which is issue command, pull request, command, star, watch event, all of the events that GitHub is tracking. And we're tracking all of this activity to understand the so-called network effect, how much and how many developers are interacting with the protocols. And as you can see here on the first slide, on slide 5 actually, is that pushes, things that actually push code to the protocol comprise 26% of total GitHub activity relative to the protocol, which I think is a pretty good number. Next slide, please. Yeah, and here we can see the entire activity chart for all of the protocols, all of the blockchain protocols that we are tracking. And you can see a few spikes in here, which are pretty interesting. And the first one, the Corda one spike, is when Corda had its first ever CordaCon in September 2017, which you can see was really effective as it attracted a number of developers, and they went to the GitHub repositories of the Corda project and did a few forks in there and started and watched and subscribed to the project. And the other one, which is interesting here, is Hyperledger Fabric 1, which had significant developer activity in March 2018, which was when Hyperledger Fabric released its version 1.1, and had a pretty eventful month in there, and had like a few conferences around the world. It was also the same month when Hyperledger and Ripple announced that Ripple was going to join the Hyperledger consortium, and probably some of it spilled over to the Hyperledger Fabric activity in developers doing stuff in there. And Hyperledger Besu, a protocol which started late relative to all the other protocols. And in February 2019, it was actually called Pegasus Pantheon, and it only later joined Hyperledger as a Besu protocol. And as Pegasus Pantheon, it had its first ever version released, version 1.0, I'm sorry, in February 2019. And it did see, again, developers being interested in it and joining that, engaging with the protocol on GitHub. Next slide, please, Laurent. Yes, and that's also part of the project. We're tracking unique developers engaged over time. And by unique developers here, we mean that a GitHub account ever did anything to any of the protocols we are tracking, and thus became a unique developer. And these spikes in here are actually the same spikes for specifically for Hyperledger Fabric. The huge spike in there is when Hyperledger Fabric released its version 1.1, had a lot of conferences around the world, and attracted a lot of developers in there. What's interesting in here is also, as you can see right at the start of Quorum and Corda, they had quite a good number of unique developers joining these protocols and interacting with them on GitHub, which is actually interesting because if we compare Corda and Quorum, Corda, as you probably know, is a fork of Ethereum, and it enjoyed for developer traction, it enjoyed the larger Ethereum community since they were already familiar with the code. Corda, however, started as a protocol that's not a fork of anything and started blank, and it did manage to attract quite a good number of unique developers right at the start in there, which I find interesting. Next slide, please. Here you can see we compare total activity per protocol for the entire lifetime of the protocol ever since they started on GitHub, and total pushes. Pushes what actually we consider that things that make the protocol, the code of the protocol, and activities just developers, well, not just, but developers engaging with the protocols on GitHub. And as you can see, Corda and Fabric are the two big ones leading in there. And Quorum is actually an interesting one, as you're going to see later. Is it stayed for the total pushes, it's taking place number 3, and stayed relatively flat, as you're going to see later again, all through since the start until the first half of 2018, and then it picked up in pushes and started actually doing more and more development of the protocol. And Boswell is actually showing good numbers here, since it was the protocol that started late in 2018 compared to all the other protocols. It was the latest starter in there. So yeah, and showing good numbers. Next slide, please. So yeah, here we can see all protocol pushes dissected per quarter for the lifetimes of the protocols. As you can see, Corda and Fabric are again the biggest ones. And the purple one in there is Quorum, the one that I was talking about, that in the second half of 2018, started doing more and more pushes to the protocol, like developing more and more code for Quorum, and actually picked up, which is pretty interesting. And all of the protocols had a decent sort of decline in December 2019, which is probably we can attribute to the holidays and end of the year, stuff like that. And yeah, and Sawtooth, as we pointed out in the key findings, has been declining since 2018. Next slide, please. Yeah, and this is the last one for me, but it's pretty interesting. I find it super interesting. Is we picked all of the developers that unique developers that ever contributed to all of the protocols, and we bucketed them in 3 developer groups, which we call casual, frequent, and power developers, and we bucketed them according to the number of pushes they did sort of per capita. And the number here is interesting. Specifically, if you look at Corda and Fabric, number 2 and number 3 in there. And as you can see, Corda, for example, has more power developers than Fabric, which means Corda has a bigger number of developers that push the code consistently to the repositories of the project, whereas Fabric has, while having a lot more developers than all of the other protocols, including Corda, pushing the code, they have a smaller amount of code pushes per unique developer. And so, and hence they have like a smaller number of power developers and a much bigger number of what we call casual developers that did less than 15 pushes for the entire lifetime of the protocol. Next slide, please. And so a few things, as Laurent mentioned at the start, and some of the findings that I shared, I want to conclude with things like Hyperledger Fabric and Quorum they do enjoy and they did enjoy the bigger communities when they started, because as you know, Hyperledger Fabric does have a lot of Linux people in there from the Linux Foundation, and Quorum has people from the Ethereum community, and they're all familiar with the code. Core, however, doesn't look like it had a previous community of developers, and it did show good numbers for that. And Quorum did a significant increase in contributors in there, and so they are developing the protocol consistently and in increasing numbers since late 2018. And Beso, Hyperledger Beso did have a really great start when we compare all of the protocols, and will probably continue to be so. And Sawtooth did see a sharp decline in contributors and activity and code pushes. And this should be it for me.
Right, thank you very much, Ake. Guys, let me complete this before we move to some question and answers. So one thing that probably you noticed is both Fabric and Corda seems to present an overwhelming amount of developer compared to the other blockchain protocol. And as much as this is a fact, it does not mean that some of the other protocols don't have a very active and engaging developer community. We see at Chainstack a lot of projects being run and being built on Quorum, and we obviously see project built on multi-chain and some of the others. So even though Fabric and Corda seems to be the most active today, I think each of the blockchain protocol really address different use case and different scenario. And this is why at Chainstack we provide this blockchain agnostic vision of the world, where we give developers the ability to build on any blockchain protocol, both private permission blockchain, but also public blockchain such as Ethereum and Bitcoin. I mean, for us, it's all about being relevant in the market and offering developers the option to build on top of the protocol that they seem is the best for the use case and for the scenario that they are addressing. So that's how the idea of Chainstack came about, and that's how we build the platform today. In fact, if you access chainstack.com and go to our console, you can easily, within a few minutes, deploy a node for Corda or for Fabric starting next week that we will launch. And of course, for Ethereum or for Quorum or some of the other protocols that we support. The goal for us is really to allow developers to save time by being standardizing the process of the deployment and management and orchestration of the network, but also be agile in the way those networks can actually be organized and deploy all this for the benefits of the cost. So Jay kindly mentioned that we would be participating in Hyperledger Global Forum 2020 in Phoenix next week. I'm actually flying with some of the team members on Sunday, and we'll be in Phoenix starting Monday evening. We love to welcome you during the event. You can look for us on the exhibition floor. You can also access our website to check our speaking slots and demo time. I would also like to invite you to join our happy hour. It will be a very informal gathering on Thursday evening at 6:30 p.m. Just next to the convention center at the Phoenix Westin Hotel, which is literally a minute away from the convention center. And you can basically go to our website and register for the event if you'd like to join. Now, that's all for me. Jay, I'm not sure whether we have time for some question, but I think we should have 6 minutes if we're correct. And we'll be happy together with Hake taking some question about the report or about the index.
Great. Any questions?
Any plans to do an analysis of blockchain projects beyond the protocols or the code bases?
Laurent, did you hear that?
No, we cannot hear the question, sorry.
Yeah, Laurent, can you hear this?
Yes, Ken.
Okay, any plans to do an analysis of blockchain projects, the thousands that are out there versus just the protocols or the code bases?
Yeah, so very good question. And yes, we did have this comment. We have no plan to do this right now for the reason it's extremely difficult to do that. And we think you have a lot of research firms that are basically, creating listings of application and projects being used. So we're going to stick to what we know how to do. But yeah, that would definitely be very complementary to our report.
Maybe one follow-up question, Laurent. When did you say your service would be available across all of those different platforms or protocols?
We launched in June 2019, so about 8 months ago. Today we support Corda, multi-chain, Quorum, Ethereum, and Bitcoin, and we will announce the release of Fabric 2.0 support in Chainstack next Tuesday on the first day of the global Hyperledger Forum.
Yeah, great.
And Laurent, you are a sponsor of the Hyperledger Global Forum, if I'm correct. And what can you talk about what you'll be showing at the booth? I assume you have a booth and so forth.
Yes, so for us, Fabric is a new ecosystem, very engaging ecosystem. We are new to this ecosystem, even though we work with Fabric, obviously, to support it for the past 7 or 8 months. In fact, we started building the support for Fabric on version 1.2, and then we came to understand that 2.0 was on the way, so we kind of delay the release of Fabric 2.0. So we're super excited now that 2.0 is going to be available in Chainstack. And for us, being at the Global Forum is going to be a way to get acquainted with this very large ecosystem of very dynamic ecosystem of partners and developers. We hope we're going to be able to talk to as many of them and show them that what we built in Chainstack from a managed service standpoint, so that you can automate provisioning and basically deployment, management, and orchestration of nodes and network on Fabric 2.0. Is an interesting value proposition for the community. So please, if you're part of the event, stop by, look for me, I'll be there together with a couple of team members, and we'll be very happy to show you around Chainstack and of course for you to try it out.
Great.
Question?
There's a question.
You mentioned there are over 17,000 developers making pushes to GitHub for Fabric. What's attracting all that development? Are there some big projects out there?
So those are active, unique developers. The 17,561 number you're mentioning. I think it's interesting, and I'm not sure, I'm going backward on my slide. I don't want to make a long-winded answer here, but I think this slide is probably one of the most interesting slides in the report. I think it shows a type of developer contributing to some of these projects, right? So you have what we have called casual developer, which basically contribute to less than 15 events. You have frequent developer between 50 and 150, and then you have power developer in excess of 150. And you do notice that in between, say, Fabric, where the community is very large, and basically the number of casual developer and frequent developer is much larger than for the other protocol, especially compared to Corda or compared to multi-chain, which is probably a little bit more close in the way the developer community is being set up. I think the number itself is probably not, it's only one view, right? I think the type of developer is essentially more interesting to assess the health and the openness of the community. Did that answer your question?
Yeah. This slide right here shows it's lots and lots of little projects, not big projects.
Yeah, a lot of proof of concept.
Yeah, exactly. One other question: what does Quorum offer after forking from Ethereum that's attracting people to Quorum? What's the attraction there? What are they offering that Ethereum's not?
So is the question, what is Quorum offering that Ethereum is not offering?
Right. What's the attraction
Yeah.
to that?
But I think Quorum has integrated some security feature that are useful for several of the projects that we had access to. That's independently from the index, right? We did not track Ethereum, but we do have a lot of people building on Quorum in the financial industry and taking advantage of the stream and the security feature in Quorum, privacy feature in Quorum, which are not necessarily available in Ethereum.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah,
Laurent?
I can also chime in on that. Apart from the private transactions, Quorum is also offering two consensus mechanisms. One is Raft, and the other one is IBFT, which Ethereum does not. And Quorum is actually has implemented Raft, which is a pretty fast consensus mechanism based on etcds. Raft, which is super famous, and yeah. So you can actually have a private network with private transactions and a very fast consensus mechanism, which you need for a private network and you don't need for a public network.
And those are still considered ERC-20 as well?
I'm sorry?
Not a token, it's just a platform, just a development environment.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Not a token.
Okay.
We had the question answered internally. Laurent, do you mind stopping your screen share?
Absolutely. Guys, thank you very much for joining us. Jay, thank you again for giving us the opportunity to present to Desert Blockchain. I'm looking forward to potentially meeting you next week, guys, and I wish you all a very good evening.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
David, are you on the Zoom link?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, awesome.
My audio is okay?
Yep, very
Great.
good. Can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I can.
Cool.
Thanks
well,
everybody for your time. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
Great. David, if you would go ahead and introduce yourself.
Here, let me see if I share my screen, if you're able to see that. Just one second. Are you able to see my screen?
Yep, very good. Looks great.
Hello?
Yes, we can see your screen just fine. Can you hear me?
Hello?
Yeah, we can see your screen fine.
Okay, great. Sorry, my audio just went out for a minute. Great. Well, I was saying thank you for the opportunity to speak. I had put some information together about Hyperledger. I wasn't sure exactly what sort of information you'd be looking for. Some of this is fairly introductory, and maybe that's information that we could go through quickly if you feel like you have the basics. But basically, I wanted to just make myself available, give you some information about Hyperledger that you would find useful, answer any questions. And then as Laurent was speaking about, we do have the biggest Hyperledger event of the year coming up next week in Phoenix, and just wanted to give you some more information about that and share a few different ways where you can get involved if you are interested in that. So with that, I guess I'd start by saying, do you have any questions for me? Again, I don't necessarily need to go through all my slides. I'd want to make sure to give you information you're interested in. So is there anything specific I can answer for now up front?
David, if you would just talk maybe a little bit about the Linux Foundation.
Sure.
And Hyperledger, how that relationship works, that might be helpful. And I think it'd be great for you to go through your slides. I think you did a great job with the deck.
Okay, great. Well, I can go through fairly quickly, and then please just stop me if there's something you want to do a deeper dive on. Just stop, and we'll just do that. And I can share these. I think I did share them with you, Jay. So yeah, if you want to share them out with everybody afterwards, this is all public information. Please feel free to go through. There's links and resources that you may find helpful. And I will do that, but I'll start with a brief introduction. My name is David Boswell. I'm one of the directors of ecosystem at Hyperledger. I've been at the Linux Foundation now for just over 2 years. I'm relatively new to the blockchain space. I got involved with blockchain when I joined Hyperledger, but I've been involved in the open source community for a long time. I got involved in the late 90s with the Mozilla project and have been involved in a number of other open source projects since. So, but just speaking about the Linux Foundation and its relationship to Hyperledger, You may be familiar that Hyperledger is one of the projects hosted by the Linux Foundation. And as you might suppose, the Linux Foundation hosts the Linux project, the Linux kernel itself. And it has grown over the years. It is now hosting many, many more projects than just the Linux kernel. There's a whole range of different technologies, and that fits the mission of the organization. You know, the organization exists as a nonprofit to make sure that important technologies that are being developed will always be freely available. That's free, both as in free at no cost, but more importantly, free as in freedom. You know, we want to make sure that these important technologies are there for you to take, adapt, use, modify, contribute back to. You know, that's the whole open source ethos. And so when that's basically where Hyperledger came from. When the Linux Foundation a few years ago saw that blockchain was going to be an important technology, they wanted to make sure that there was going to be a free and open alternative. We started the Hyperledger project at that time. And since then, it really has been so exciting to be a part of something that so many other people are excited about. It's the fastest growing project in Linux Foundation history. A lot of enthusiasm in the space. You know, as I was saying, it's an open source effort specifically focused around making sure that there are going to be healthy initiatives around specifically permission blockchain use cases. Although that's somewhat expanded over the years, and we can talk about that. You know, most recently, you know, late last year, we've expanded that somewhat with the Hyperledger Besu project, but we can get into that in a minute. And it's a global collaboration, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to speak to you. Anyone, anywhere can get involved. I don't know how many people here have been involved in an open source community before, but that's what really got me hooked and why I've been involved in open source for 20 years. I just love the idea that you can show up and contribute, and there's no gatekeeper, there's nobody stopping you. If you see something that's cool to you and you want to get involved and help out with it and get involved with it, the door is open. So, you know, that I love that about open source projects, and that's certainly true about Hyperledger. So I will speak to some of the different ways you can get involved with the community if you're interested later in the slides too. And I'm happy to answer questions about that. One note about our leadership, you may be familiar, Brian Bellendorf, who most notably was involved in the early days of the Apache web server and has done a lot in a number of open source projects himself. He's the executive director, and he'll be in Phoenix next week as well. So if you have interest in a meeting with Brian, you'll have an opportunity then. And I won't go through the details of these, but just again, speaking to what's going on in the community, a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of activity, and it's exciting to see you know, what's happening. I will take a few minutes to speak to this slide. So when the Hyperledger project started, there was just one project at the time, and it has grown over the years. And that's, again, speaking to the open source nature of the project. It's a very bottoms-up process. You know, we have individuals and organizations come into the community and said, hey, I'm interested in this or that, or I've worked on this project, can I contribute it? So a number of different projects over the years that Hyperledger has existed have come in and expanded what we call the Hyperledger greenhouse. We think of it as a greenhouse because I think it captures the experimental nature of where blockchain technologies are right now. You know, it's a new technology, and we think there needs to be a period of basically, to keep going with the greenhouse metaphor, growing a lot of different seeds and seeing what you know, thrives, and then maybe in a few years from now we can you know, really focus in on what you know, which of those experiments is taken off the most. But right now, you can see on here, we have a number of distributed ledger technologies that are being developed in the greenhouse right now, as well as a number of libraries and tools. And again, we can go into some of the details later, but you can see on here, each of the distributed ledgers has somewhat of a different focus. So for example, the Hyperledger ND project, as the name suggests, is focused on decentralized identity use cases. And you know, each one of these has a different focus. And so if you've only heard of one, you know, I think Fabric is probably the most well-known of the Hyperledger projects, but just to share with you that there's a lot going on. So if you haven't looked at Hyperledger before, or you looked at it a few years ago, it's certainly changed since then. So you may want to go to the website, take a look at these different projects, and just you know, familiarize yourself with what's going on. And again, as an open source project, we invite you to bring new ideas, new projects to the community as well. If there's something that you think Hyperledger should be doing, but you don't see it represented here or in any of the slides that I'm going to present, you know, certainly we welcome those contributions. That's what makes a community work, when somebody steps up and says, hey, this is important to me, and I'm going to contribute it. So we definitely welcome that. And just to say a word, I assume most people here is familiar with open source collaboration, but just to say a few more notes about this. The technical community is 100% open, and it's not in any way directed by the Linux Foundation. The Linux Foundation is just here as support. We don't make any technical decisions. Everything is made by the community of people who step up and say, hey, I'm going to be a part of what's going on here. So all the contributions happen by community members. The leadership in the technology, we have a technical steering committee made up of community members. They're the ones who make the technical decisions within the community. And again, the Linux Foundation is here just, we create the infrastructure for the community and then provide support. And then we do a lot of, celebration and marketing of the work that the community does by, going out and talking to people such as yourself or doing things actively online. And so without all that having been said, I think I've said it before and I'll reiterate it now, we do want, if you're interested in blockchain technologies and you might want to get involved in the open source community, we would definitely want you to get involved. And I'll speak to a few minutes about why somebody might want to get involved with an open source community, because I think there's a lot of different reasons, some people get a different set of value out of it than others, but I can just share from my experience over the years what the reasons I see why some people have chosen to get involved in an open source community. I think one is that you can shape the direction of the project to fit your needs. Again, the code is open, and if you want to contribute a patch to have this project do this certain thing, you can. There's nobody, it's not like proprietary software where you don't have the opportunity to do that. You can shape the direction of the project in the way that you think it needs to go just by showing up and contributing those patches. I think another big thing is that you can decrease the time to market and accelerate the work of a project. With enough hands, the work goes faster, and that's one of the benefits of an open source community. It's not just you and your team, working together. It's basically anybody around the world who's interested in this project can come together and as a larger group effort can really make things happen on a scale that maybe you alone or your team alone couldn't do. And kind of similar to that, there's this law, called Linus's law, I believe, that speaks to the idea of a collaborative effort. The law is with enough eyes, all bugs are shallow, and that's basically another way of stating the thing I just said. Everybody everywhere has their own perspective and their own skill sets, and it's really, and I've seen it in action. It's really a fascinating thing to see when you're really struggling with a problem, and then somebody comes up and offers you the solution because they just were able to see it from their different perspective, or they had a skill set that I didn't have. It's really a magical, experience, at least in my experience in open source, to see that happen. You're like, hey, I just can't see the fix here. And then somebody shows up and it's like, oh, hey, you need to do it this way. I've seen that as another benefit of being in an open community, really tapping into those different skills around the world. And I think there's a whole lot to learn. There's a lot of smart, interesting people in an open source community, not just in Hyperledger, but in any open source community. So I think if you're interested in learning about what's going on and learning from other smart people who are doing things in this space, I think certainly being involved is an opportunity to learn a lot. And then similar to that, you gain some experience as well. So I'll just go through, again, some of this fairly quickly, and please stop me if there's anything in particular you are interested in, but I will point to a few different ways that you can get involved. And then just as a starting point, I'll just say, a few things. Getting involved doesn't necessarily mean submitting a patch. You could just dial into a call and just listen. So as a starting point for contribution, that's certainly a perfectly acceptable option. So feel free to lurk. Maybe later you'll be more actively involved and you will, speak on a call or present on a call or submit a patch or do any of that. But up front, feel free to just dial in and listen, get onto a mailing list and just read what's going on to see what's going on. Just get a sense for what's happening. And there's no need to wait. Yeah.
If I could interrupt, I'd just like to make the point that LinkedIn has identified blockchain development skills as the #1
yeah, I'd heard that.
Skill out there. Yeah. And
I
so,
had definitely heard that. Yeah.
so just to kind of highlight your point about getting involved, just getting on a call, even if you don't know anything about blockchain, and starting to listen to the conversation and starting to pick up the language and so forth,
Absolutely.
can be a great entry into the space. And
Absolutely.
we actually have a student here, Max, who's first year at Grand Canyon University, interested in cybersecurity. I don't know how much Max knows about blockchain, but what you're suggesting about just simply getting on a call, I think is a great piece of advice for anybody looking to have an introduction into the space. So thank you.
Absolutely, and that person is welcome to do that. I mean, I have experienced, when I've talked to people about getting involved in the open source community, that it feels like the barrier to entry is so high. You're like, well, I'm never going to actually contribute code to it, so what do I have to offer? But that's really not the only way that you can contribute. Yeah, but you're absolutely right. Just listening in, understanding the language, getting a sense of the topics that are relevant. I think all of that, if you were going to go to a job interview and you can say, speak intelligently about something around digital identity because you listened to some experts speaking about it just the week before, you're going to sound really intelligent and like you know what's going on, I would have to say. And I've seen that over and over again. For example, I was at Mozilla for a long time, and one of the most frequent set of contributors that we saw were students, because they would, if you could exit college and say, hey, I got my code in Firefox, or I did this, or I did that, that's going to look excellent on, a job interview or on a resume. So yeah, yes, thank you for bringing that up. And again, just to speak to this slide, you don't need to wait for an invitation. Nothing in the community is closed. Nothing requires an invitation. Like I'd mentioned, for example, before, the technical steering committee, that's open. If you want to just dial in, you can. There's information on the wiki about when those meetings are, and the dial-in's right there. You can just dial in and listen, or join the mailing list. And that goes for any of the project calls, any of the project mailing lists. I'll speak in a minute about some of the different groups we have. We have some industry-specific groups. So if you're really interested, for example, in what's going on with blockchain and healthcare, or blockchain and telecom, just join. Please don't wait for an invitation. And just be assured that all projects in the Linux Foundation adhere to a strict code of conduct. It's going to be a professional, safe environment. So, just be aware going into that we do hold every one of our Linux Foundation projects to a strict, standard of participation. And again, as I was saying before, it's easier said than done to say, hey, just show up and join a call or do that. I do understand that there maybe it doesn't, you might say, hey, it's not for me, or what would I have to offer? But, I wouldn't worry about that. If you're interested, we want you to show up, and all you have to do is listen at first, and then you'll see something that's excited, and then you can jump in and get going from there. And again, please, Jay, if you haven't already, share these slides around with everybody after. But I did collect a few different, these are all links. I did collect a few different good general guides around contributing to open source. So again, if that's something you've never done in the past, you may want to read through some of these resources. And just one note, I will say you don't have to be a member to participate. You may have heard that Hyperledger does have member organizations, and that's true. We have around 250 member organizations, and those range from some of the largest companies in the world, such as Intel or IBM or Accenture, to some of the smallest, and to some universities and organizations like Arizona State University, for example, is a member. So there's a wide range of member organizations, but that's really optional. Some organizations do want that formal relationship with Hyperledger, and that's fine. So that's why we provide it. But I have heard that thought before, like, well, I'm not a member of an organization that's officially associated with Hyperledger, and that's fine. You don't just to be clear, that's not a requirement by any means. The community is open to anybody. So let me just share a little bit. I know Laurent was speaking about Global Forum coming up next week, so you already have some of this information, so apologies if this is duplicating anything, but just to make sure that we cover everything. Next week in Forum is the largest Hyperledger event of the year. Unfortunately, with everything going on with the coronavirus, you know, we probably don't have quite the number of attendees as we would have otherwise. You know, we have a large community in China who obviously are not going to be traveling here, but even so, there will be hundreds of people from all around the community there in Phoenix next week. So that's going to be an excellent opportunity for you to come and speak to people. If you're interested in Indie, or you're interested in fabric, or you're interested in what's going on in healthcare, those people will be in town in the convention center there for you to meet, for you to listen to, for you to network with. So we do really encourage you to get involved for one day or all the days during the week. I do think it's going to be a great opportunity if you're interested. And to let you know, there is a 20% discount available that you can use. There's a code here on the screen, the HDF Meet 20, that you can use during registration. So if that's helpful, please do make use of that. And I will talk in a minute about actually a free option too to get involved in part of Global Forum here in a minute. And that's speaking to our meetup groups. So to me, this really, our meetup group really speaks to what I was saying before about how I feel open source is magical, where people just show up and help you with a problem. So the Linux Foundation staff is very small. There are about 10 people on staff who work on the Hyperledger project, but you can see here on this slide, we have over 170 different meetup groups all around the world. So obviously, it's not the Linux Foundation staff members who are doing that. You know, we just physically aren't in that many locations. So, you know, the meetup community is something that I support, and every day I'm just blown away. Somebody somewhere will show up and say, hey, you don't have a Hyperledger community here. Can I help you? And so all of these are run by people in their local communities who wanted to organize a local community there, and then we support them. So just be aware if you're ever traveling, you know, be aware that these meetups are there. If you ever want to get connected to one of these meetups, you're like, hey, you know, I'm going to be in Boston next week. Who can you connect me with? You're always welcome to reach out to me, and I can make those introductions. And we also have this map that you can get to through our Hyperledger website. And we do have a Hyperledger meetup community in Phoenix, so just be aware of that. If you're not aware of that, you can find the link here on this page. And that's what's happening. This is when I said that there's a free option to attend part of Global Forum. That's what's happening on next Tuesday, on March 3rd. We're having a free Hyperledger Phoenix meetup. Please feel free to join, no cost. There will be food and drinks. This will overlap with part of Global Forum, so you can see here on the agenda. The first hour of the meetup is going to be part of the booth crawl that's happening at Global Forum. So you can come in, experience that. Food and drink will be served at that point. And then after that booth crawl is over, we'll go to a presentation, a set of presentations. This is going to be, it's going to feature both some local community members speaking about what they're doing with Hyperledger, as well as some of the core project developers speaking about what they're doing. So there's going to be both people from Hyperledger Fabric core developers, as well as Hyperledger Besu, the new Ethereum client. Both of those will have some of the core developers speaking and introducing those technologies to you. And then again, the local community spotlight, where we hear what people have been doing with some of these technologies. So it would be great to see you there. Again, absolutely free. You know, just go. We do ask you, just so we can understand the size of the room we would need, we just ask that you please RSVP on the meetup page in advance. And then we can see you next Tuesday. So again, absolutely free. If you were interested in the whole week, you know, that would be great too. And there is that discount code, but hopefully we will see you at the meetup as well. And then just to go through quickly, so the meetup and the Global Forum are obviously ways to interact with the community in person, but there's a bunch of online ways as well. So again, be aware that all of our tools are open. You can get a Linux Foundation account here on this first link for free, and then that opens up access to all the other tools that we have, you know, our issue tracker, our chat, our wiki, etc. So again, free, available, no cost. You're welcome to just go to these links and grab the information. I'll just scan through these quickly just so you see, but here's the information about our ID, and then once you have that, it opens up. You can go in, join the wiki, you know, make edits, see what's going on. Same with the chat. You know, in the meetings there on the wiki is a public calendar. You can find the dial-in information for every single call that's happening. And then again, just join one that grabs your interest. And I did want to say one or two more other things. You know, most of what I've spoken about so far in terms of the community has been the projects themselves. I mean, obviously Hyperledger creates technologies such as Hyperledger Fabric or Hyperledger Sawtooth. But if that's all it was, it wouldn't really, I think, be very effective. In my mind, there's no point to create some software if nobody uses it, right? You know, that would be kind of a pointless effort. So it is very important for us to also provide an effort around community building around the uses of Hyperledger. So you can see on here that we have a number of special interest groups that are focused around different industries. So for example, there's 1,000 people on the healthcare special interest group mailing list, and those are all people who are looking at how do we deploy blockchain and Hyperledger technologies in this particular industry. And they, you know, it's each of these groups, you know, operates in a number of different ways, you know, depending on what the challenges of deploying Hyperledger in their industries are. But for example, the healthcare group has a speaker series, and they regularly have people say, hey, I built this with Fabric and I wanted to share my learnings. And you know, and to contrast that with the telecom special interest group, they're working on a number of white papers that look at different use cases. They did a intercarrier settlement white paper earlier this summer, and now they're currently working on using a digital identity framework to track IoT devices. They're working on a paper on that. So each of these groups is looking at different challenges because, you know, obviously different industries are different, but if you are interested in how blockchain is being used in a different scenarios, such as climate action or in the public sector, again, just be aware that these groups are there, available. You can dial in, listen, or contribute in any way you want. And there also are some cross-cutting technical groups. So if you're interested in the topic of identity, for example, or performance and scale in a blockchain environment, those technical working groups are also available. I'll just go through the rest. There's some information here. If you were interested in contributing code, this just walks you through the steps, where our source repositories are and where our issue tracker are. And we also have a labs environment that also allows you to, host some code on a Hyperledger, some infrastructure. But I'll go through that quickly because I'm just keeping an eye on the time, and I do want to make sure that this is more of a conversation than a presentation. So hopefully that was helpful. But if you have questions for me, please let me know.
Cool. Thanks, David.
Of course.
Awesome. If you'll stop your screen share, then you might be able to see us.
Yeah.
And let's open it up for questions. No, actually it's right here. So no, that's not connected. No, this is our mic.
Hey, David, my name is David as well. Can you hear me?
Oh, hey.
So what I'm hearing more and more is that EOS is being considered the Linux of the blockchain world. So seeing as you are Linux, I mean, what's your stance on that statement, I guess?
Well, I mean, to be honest, I guess I'm not that familiar. Like I said, my background is not necessarily in the blockchain space, so I may not be the best person to answer that. I mean, there's certainly people on the Linux Foundation team who know much more about the blockchain landscape than I do. So, if you do happen to be able to come to the meetup next week, I think there's definitely some people there that I can introduce you to who can.
Okay, cool. I can expand on the point briefly. It's basically because I guess it's projected that the EOS.io open source blockchain is projected to have the most instances,
okay.
like up to 10 years from now, where there'll be tens of thousands, and kind of follow a similar path that Linux did following Unix, just in, I guess that's kind of the metaphor or the analogy there. So I don't know.
Yeah, and that's great. I mean, just broadly speaking, maybe this is or is not an answer to your question, but I mean, as far as the Linux Foundation and Hyperledger are concerned, we don't think it's going to be a matter of there's going to be one winner here and there's not going to be one blockchain platform to rule them all. I mean, I think we're going to need to figure out how, just look at like the browser landscape, for example. I think a healthy internet ecosystem is one where there's a lot of competition and there's not one platform that has monopolized the whole, the browser industry. That was certainly the position at Mozilla, and I think a similar position certainly at Hyperledger. We're glad that other blockchain platforms are doing well, and I think we need to plan for a world where there will be different blockchain platforms that all need to talk to each other. So interoperability is a big a big conversation that you hear a lot of on the Hyperledger channels.
Thanks, man.
Absolutely. Any other questions? Well, David, thank you so much. That was very, very helpful. And I think that, at least for me, it sparked a lot of ways for people to get involved with the Hyperledger community, and which also kind of opens a door to getting involved with the Linux Foundation and the Linux community as well. So very
Absolutely.
good. I'm going to switch over to Todd Taylor now, and I look forward to meeting you next week, David. Thank you so
Great,
much.
yeah. And please feel free. I think everybody has my email address or can get it from Jay. Please feel free to reach out if you have any other questions that I can help with.
Very good. Thank you so much.
Bye.
All right. Let's see.
Is anybody going to the global forum next week?
I will now.
Yeah. So with that, I'll introduce Todd Taylor. Why don't you go right there in the middle, and then I'll be able to, be able to see you. Here, there we go. Okay, so you're on camera.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah. So, Todd, if you'll kind of introduce yourself and talk about your involvement with the Hyperledger Global Forum, and then maybe we'll go through a few items here.
And if David's still on, he can correct me. But so I come out of HP and IBM, where I spent most of my career. As I transitioned from my overseas assignment with IBM, I started teaching at ASU in the supply chain department. So I'm a supply chain kind of enterprise integration guy, and that's where I've spent my career. So trying to connect not only large enterprises within themselves and get them standardized on good operating systems and procedures and processes, but also how you connect kind of global value chains, right? One of the main premises of supply chain is that we compete as value chains, not necessarily as companies versus companies, right? It's Nike and their boys and girls against Adidas and their boys and girls against Under Armour and their boys and girls. So the more you can integrate, and collaborate and optimize a value chain, the better. And as I was exposed to blockchain technology several years ago, I immediately saw it as the underpinning technology elements to create systems of systems, or applications that pull together, that integrate and create platforms for these value chains. I spent a lot of my career helping companies exchange documents back and forth with trading partners through XML and EDI-based technologies. And so I know the manual, intensive effort and systems infrastructure that it requires to just do business back and forth between trading partners. We've got IT guys here that know how much money and effort and systems expense there is just exchanging purchase orders and doing and is in the collaboration integration between entities or between companies. So anyways, I came to ASU. I started the blockchain research lab at ASU, multi-department effort to really pull together people from all different work together on blockchain projects to create a student organization to get them trained on the technology foundations. I taught one of the first blockchain classes really in the US to computer science students and to business students back in 2016. And yeah, continue to.
Is that geared towards developers?
The course?
Specifically?
Yeah. Yeah, it was just to help them become familiar with the underlying technologies, to do some initial application development in some of the main code bases and protocols, looking at Ethereum applications and Hyperledger Fabric applications is what we were looking at back the first few classes. So, and we were looking at alpha code from the Fabric side at the time.
BAQ role in there somewhere?
Quality control role or a business analysis role in what context? Oh, sure. Sure, yeah. I mean, as we have development teams, making sure you've got quality control and analysis, looking at the code and everything is, huge role there. In addition to the blockchain research lab, I started a company called Genbloq, which looks at blockchain application development from that perspective, right? Building out platforms for business ecosystems. So I've been involved on a couple of token and token economics projects. Sweetbridge, you may have heard of here in town. I was one of the Sweetbridge guys for a while, and I thought they had a really good initial focus, if you're familiar with that project, to enable business collaboration. But for me, the tokenization and a lot of the token economic principles that we really want to see take hold within business networks require the underpinning business platform to be in place. So a lot of the work that I've been doing lately has been focusing on developing those platforms. And we've been applying for grant and research money too, to do a number of different projects around smart cities and around carbon sequestration and around data models for network-wide or ecosystem-wide artificial intelligence and optimization and analytics things. But yeah, so lots of activity going. We've got a project that's up and running using blockchain in the real estate space, specifically doing for title companies, helping them manage their escrow instruction communication between buyers and sellers and banks and real estate agents and all the people involved in a real estate transaction. We're securing the communication of the sensitive wire instructions because of all of the fraud that's occurring. And we've got a roadmap to do some other things within the real estate ecosystem to help secure the document exchange and some other things as well. Help update property records as they go through their life cycle eventually. And then we've also got a project in the pharmaceutical space. The nutraceutical space is where we've started. We did a project for GlaxoSmithKline that in the pharma space that now is in the nutraceutical space because of the less regulated environment, to do some track and trace and authentication and provenance genealogy of products as they come down the value chain and into an eventual product, and then getting customer feedback on that product filtered back up the chain, which, as our CVS guys know here, that's a difficult thing for those pharmaceutical companies. Something those pharmaceutical companies want, something that the CVS's and Walgreens of the world hold, and they capitalize on that information.
So Todd, I can screen share now and either go over the agenda.
Yeah,
or
we show the agenda. Let's talk about the global forum real quick. I sat on the committee that just reviewed the business and technology presentations. We had hundreds and hundreds of submissions, and we just had to pull that down into what you see now on the agenda.
let's see the agenda.
Yeah, that's it.
Okay. So
View the
just
schedule.
Just tell me where you want
Yeah,
to
there you go. If you go to the website, just Google search Hyperledger Global Forum and then go to view the schedule. In this teal color, the keynote sessions, the business sessions are in green and the technical sessions are in blue. Brian Bellendorf, the executive director of Hyperledger, kicks it off, and then there's a variety of presentations. There's a keynote by Don Tapscott and some other folks that they've invited. There's a bunch you can see in the green of the business sections. You'll see a lot of the sponsoring entities, Accenture and others presenting there. Dan Middleton from Intel was one of the main guys on the Sawtooth project, if you're interested in Sawtooth. Yeah, you'll see all of the technical sessions in blue. This is Tuesday, so there's a reception Monday night, and then this is Tuesday morning. Keep scrolling through, Jay. These are booth kind of demonstrations in the skin colored there. What do you call that? Taupey color? Tan color.
Okay.
Yeah, I keep scrolling through. You'll see in green some business sections. Yeah, the technical sections here in blue. Keep scrolling. And you get a variety of presentations on Tuesday and Wednesday on a variety of topics, digital identity, or any of the kind of Hyperledger projects. You'll get presentations on those specific initiatives. And you'll get some company presentations, people who have worked on projects. This is a guy that you want to make note of. Nathan George is one of the main contributors of the identity, the digital identity work and Project Indy, the Hyperledger Project Indy. He, in fact, is leading a workshop with some of his guys on Friday. That's a full day digital identity workshop, and probably worth the price of admission in and of itself. It's an expensive ticket. It's like $1,000 to get into this event. So the 20% discount's a $200 discount. But the digital identity workshop on Friday alone, if that's of interest to you, will be really good. Tracy Kirk's doing one on Thursday. She's a local lady, super smart. She's now one of the main people at Accenture working on blockchain projects. She's doing a workshop on Thursday all day.
And what's the topic on that one?
Scroll down to it real quick. I forgot her specific one. I'll highlight some other things as you scroll here, Dan. Keep going. Yeah, you see the basis.
There's Wednesday.
There's Wednesday. I mean, you can see there's a ton of tracks going on simultaneously. You can kind of pick your poison. We don't have time to get into all of them. This is the Thursday workshop, and you'll see Tracy's right here. Let go of your unconscious bias. I don't remember exactly what she meant by that. But yeah, you see IBM folks presenting here. And this session actually, they've got listed at 9, but it continues throughout the day. If you scroll down, Jay, you'll see those sessions continue. I think, well, maybe not on Thursday as much. Go back up a little bit. Yeah, they repeat in the afternoon, so it's full blocks, maybe morning block, afternoon block. On Friday, it's full day sessions, and they're technical workshops. So anyway, if you're interested, that's what's going to happen next week, with some receptions and other things sprinkled throughout the evenings. Any questions on that? Our meetup event is at the convention center Tuesday, starting at 5:45. And there will be some presentations from some local companies there, plus a few of the Hyperledger contributors. Brian Bellendorf will be there, and some other folks as well, and that's a free one. So if you don't do anything else, that's one that you might want to hit. Tyler Wentz at Mindshift. That's a healthcare project that's here out in Mesa. That's a good one. One of the students, Sasha Pesic from Vislor, he's associated with the ASU Blockchain Research Lab, and Dragan Boskovic, if you know Dragan. Intel, IBM, and other folks bouncing around there as well. So that'll be a good one.
And I think you've got about 50 people signed up so far for this, 55.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
You see some of these guys, some of these guys probably already.
Yep.
There's no Mark.
Yep. Do you want to go over Genbloq? I've got that teed up.
I can just talk to you if you have any questions about some of the projects that we're working on, if that's of interest to you. We have a pretty small development team. One of my plans originally was, hey, I'll leverage all these computer science students and I'll start to knock out blockchain projects left and right? But the students have a hard time delivering is the problem. And when you're engaged with, our first project was with Cisco Systems. So when you're trying to deliver a project for Cisco and you got student jokers bouncing around, those guys are not worried about you delivering a project. They're worried about what's happening on the weekend, right? I shouldn't say that as a generalization, but you know what I mean. You need experienced folks that really have a breadth of technology understanding to get in and deliver on those projects. Not that the students can't contribute and can't learn, but they've got to be contributing members rather than leads and core team members. So yeah, our first project was with Cisco, which was a proof of concept project, Hyperledger Fabric, looking at just core purchase order transactions with them and some of their tier 1 suppliers and contract manufacturers and shipping providers. So can we use Hyperledger Fabric in its beta form back then to track and kind of create this systems of systems type platform? And no, it wasn't ready back then, and we kind of got way ahead of ourselves, but we learned where things were and what was really going on and what that platform eventually needs to look like. We did a project for GlaxoSmithKline on pharma track and trace. It was a AIDS vaccine. We tracked all the way through the supply chain down to the clinicians, and then information back up the chain, which led to our healthcare project, which is called HealthLock. And then we had a project with IBM around conflict minerals track and trace, where we learned a lot. And then the real estate project is our other big project, the title company project. So I'm happy to describe those projects to you in more detail if there's interest. Yeah.
I was a business analyst for 22 years.
Okay.
Doing process flows, high level and detail level requirements, as well as test scenario creation, testing, tracking defects, that kind of thing.
Yep.
And I've also, at the same time, last 30 years, involved in real estate. Doing a lot of full-time real estate stuff now. I would love to join that real estate project.
Yeah, it's a good project. It's there's art to the science of these blockchain projects, right? I mean, my overarching goal is just stay involved, right? Is just kind of have my team of developers, have some student participation, help some students in the process. But this technology is evolving and maturing as we go, and it still has a lot of evolving and maturing to do before we can deploy these large enterprise network platforms that I want to deploy one day. But we're not there yet from a digital identity and from just
yeah, everything's still in alpha and beta.
Yeah, I mean, it's proof of concept time, right? It's just kind of investigation pilot project playing in the sandbox time. We're still kind of in that. So my overarching objective is to stay relevant.
That real estate one's a good project.
It is a good project.
That has some good width to it.
Yeah, and that's where I'm going with the comment, is that there's an art to the science, right? So even though we've got this long-term objective to deploy, blockchain across all these business networks, and that's maybe the long-term objective, in the short term, there are opportunities to leverage the technology where the technology lends capability today that didn't exist previously. So, we were lucky to stumble across the real estate opportunity where they've got a real need to secure those wire instructions between multiple parties, and also to secure document exchange. We've got to get them off email, because it's the email intercepts, as you know, in the real estate industry, that are causing a lot of the problem. I don't know if you saw, there was a headline just this week, a guy lost $450,000 because somebody intercepted his email and sent an email to his admin assistant while he was traveling overseas that said, hey, wire $450K over to this account that I'm going to need for this, for this deal that we're doing. And so the executive admin sent $450K wire to an offshore account, money gone, right? And that type of email intercept is happening all the time between real estate agents, brokers, title agents, customers, buyers, sellers.
Everybody has to sign wire fraud disclosures.
Yeah, so what has happened is we've gone back to cashier's checks now. Now everybody's walking down to the title company with a stinking cashier's check for escrow. Here's my escrow money. Here's my funds to close. It's just like grandma did, right? Back in the day.
I can tell you, a lot of agents go to the escrow office to pick up their checks.
I know
because they don't want to wire it.
I know. No, we've gone back 35, 40 years, right? Anyway, that's a good project, and we've got a couple of initial title companies that are working on it, and we've got some real estate agents, some big brokerages that are also working on it now. So we've got some competition in the space. We don't think their visions is complete or whatever, but some of them have a little more money than we've got, and they're spending it on a little bit different approach. The healthcare project is also really cool if you're interested in that one. But
can you describe it a little bit?
Yeah, so from the GSK project, where we were tracking the AIDS vaccine all the way through its initial ingredients, all the way through the packaging and manufacturing, and then out through its distribution to the clinician that's administering the vaccine to the patient, and then getting information from that patient and clinician back up to those ingredient suppliers was the focus of that. And again, it was a proof of concept project. but it led to this nutraceutical project. Nutraceuticals, much less regulated, thus problem but opportunity, right? Because we don't have as much track and trace on the nutraceutical project or products like a herbal supplement or a, there's all this stuff around CBD happening today. Okay, everybody's taking CBD. Where's that stuff coming from? What's really in the product, in the gummy or the whatever extract, whatever they're taking, right?
Is the THC?
Yeah, what is the THC content? Anyway, where's that stuff coming from? And it can be applied to food products or other products as well. But the idea is, okay, can we create a platform here to help the legitimate companies who really want to show where their goods are coming from, to give them a platform to show that. And so we've got some initial suppliers and manufacturers who are good guys in the industry that are okay with that transparency and that level of, in fact, they base their companies on that level of transparency. One's called Trace Minerals that, yeah, they want to show what they got. And there's a couple of Brilliant Health and some others, nutraceutical companies that really want to show what they've got and want to show the certificates of analysis and all the other documentation associated with their products as it goes through their value chain. So, yeah, and then we're getting the information back up through the value chain is also a big deal, and there's just a lot of lack of that information sharing happening. So the business model is really just to charge those manufacturers a bit of a monthly subscription fee to help highlight. It's more kind of a marketing thing for the supplement companies where they can differentiate their products through that transparency.
There may be a lot of other applications. Yeah, that's a good idea. That's a great idea.
Yeah, you like?
Yeah, I like that idea. Yeah, there may be a lot of other applications.
Sure, food products.
Yeah, I was working on something that was tracking beef source all the way up valve and up, so that when you bought a hamburger,
you knew where it was.
Shoot it with the QR code, and you would get the whole rundown what that cow ate.
That's just what we're doing.
Slaughtered, all of it.
Yeah, we got this
so deep into it if you really want to. You just flash it.
Yeah, that's how we had a proof of concept done a couple of years ago on the track and trace for the pharma stuff. So you scan the QR code and you get the whole genealogy of the product, right? Along with certificates of analysis on various stages, various combinations. Yeah, everything.
E. coli, that started a lot of that, right?
Yeah, the pork stuff coming out of China, the milk stuff in China, tons of food safety issues and other things.
Todd, is there a way that the Desert Blockchain community can support what you're up to, either at ASU or Thunderbird or Genbloq, or
things?
What thoughts do you have on how can we bring the talent that's not only in this room but here in Arizona?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the
forefront
things we need to do and we want to do is really to raise the level of capability that is there. For our team to really come in and make a meaningful contribution to our projects from a technical standpoint, you've got to be a fairly experienced person. I mean, we've got front end development needs and capability needs that exist. We've got kind of back end and chain code stuff also that needs to be done. We've got DevOps work that has to be done. But my original plan of asking a student to do some of that work kind of fell on its face. But we've had to bring on experienced folks that make a lot of money, and we pay them a lot of money, and but they make real contributions and they can get things done. So talent is scarce. Really good talent is really scarce. So just helping to bring people along, and I'm okay with people learning as they go and coming in and enhancing their skill set. But we've got to get where I'm working on getting the curriculum improved in the engineering school and in other places to really bring it along so that they can make those contributions coming out of school or as students. But also any experienced full stack developer, if they're a good quick learner, can come up to speed with some effort. So and we can bring them along. So
cool.
Yeah. But no,
All right.
thanks. I'm happy to engage with you. If you've got an interest in a real estate project, then let's chat about that. If you've got other things that you want to look at, we've got grant funding pending on a artificial intelligence data modeling project, on a smart city, smart region project, on a carbon sequestration project. So hopefully we get a good hit on that NSF funding as well that will spark some activity. So we'll see
Cool.
how it goes. But yeah, thanks.
All
See
right.
you guys again. Yeah.
Well, thank you, Todd.
Yeah, thank you.
All right.
So we're going to wrap it up, at least the presentation portion. And again, I want to thank everybody for coming out. And this is a key piece for the community to get momentum here. A little bit about what we offer at Desert Blockchain. We have the monthly sessions on the fourth Wednesday of the month. Every Saturday, just about every Saturday afternoon at 2 o'clock, we gather here and we hack on different projects like Libra, Filecoin, other things, sometimes hardware. This Saturday I have a funeral to attend, so we won't be open this Saturday, but keep an eye on the weekly update that's sent out. That has a schedule. On Thursday afternoons, we also do some hacking here. We're open to other activities, workshops, things like that. We'll probably reinstitute the hackathons at some point. This is funded through the Citizen Program, which is $10 a month, and you can sign up through Patreon. The idea is to keep this decentralized for you. No sponsorships, no bias, keep this as neutral as possible, and that's through the Citizen Program. So with that, thank you so much for being here. I'm going to shut off the recording, and next month we have Dash coming in, Brian Taylor and Bob Carroll Dash. So thank you.
Is Dash have a local office? Yeah. I have it on my calendar. Yeah.